So, I mean, the way we pose the question is controversial in itself, as you noticed earlier. So, but we decided to put it that way, and then you can elaborate on why do you disagree with the question in itself, right? So, why should Marxists listen to feminists? Why should Marxists try to incorporate what feminists have to say? And I say feminists now, but you might respond to why they should listen to women, for example, as opposed to feminists.
Okay, yeah. I think that feminism as a movement has provided the left and workers with so much that has pushed us forward as a whole movement, but particularly for women. The problem that I have has always been that the main division that feminists draw is between the genders as opposed to, or between the sexes as opposed to between the classes. And because as a Marxist I see class as the fundamental divide in society, I think that this brings us down a very dangerous road when we start to see things with men versus women. But Marxists have, in terms of one of the biggest things we want to do, which is to build a revolutionary party, we have recruited from
we cut those things out.
Okay.
I hope.
Yes, good. It's putting me off though.
Right, so I mean...
Sorry, this is a...
Sorry,
oh.
We're doing an interview
for
a website, and actually that was supposed to be an empty room for
yeah.
that.
Because I just want to know if there is a...
At 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock,
yeah.
we have activity, yes?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I'll pick it up from...
I know, it's very distracting.
No, that's okay, yeah.
Suddenly there's
I could have carried on, but I was just like... But, Marxists want to work with feminists, and we want to put it crudely, we want to recruit from the feminist milieu, because we want to work with women, working women, but we want to recruit as many people as we can on a working class Marxist program. And, the other thing is that feminists do become specialists on the woman question. They can offer a lot and do some of the best campaigning. In my opinion, because they don't work with the coherent framework that's necessary that Marxism offers. If I was a feminist, I would, to put it bluntly, I'd be doing maybe some good work, but I'd be just doing it for the rest of my life, and I would be fighting for reforms which could be snatched away again. I would be maybe raising consciousness to a certain extent about the plight of women, but not really getting to not getting to how to solve it overall, to challenging the social structures that create it in the first place. And if we don't do that, then we're not actually really challenging the position of women and trying to improve the position of women in general. Not really. We might do it in small ways, but part of the problem, as I've said, is they can be taken away again, so it's transitory. And also, we can't ignore the bourgeois roots as well of the feminist movement. So I want to listen because I want to... some of our struggles are the same, but at the same time, an element of our struggle is totally different, because feminists want to make things better for women within a capitalist framework. And even Marxist feminists, as we were discussing earlier, will try to take elements of the Marxist program and kind of square it with elements of the feminist program. And I don't, or the feminist program is a simplistic way of putting it, but different elements of feminism, and it's inherently contradictory, and they can't be reconciled. And I think that essentially working class women want an answer as well. We want an answer to how to improve our lives, and I think that Marxism offers that answer as opposed to feminism.
You're speaking about Marxism, and I think the way we asked the question, and I noticed that only, while we were talking, while you were talking, and while I had the interview with Judith as well, is that we asked why should Marxists listen to feminists and not why should Marxism integrate ideas of feminism or something like that. So inadvertently, I'm sure, we adopted the critique from certain strands of feminism, I think, and the where it's coming from, I think, is the context of 68 and the second wave. That was very much confronting the socialist or Marxist left, which was predominantly male, and very belittling of women and women's position and women's issues, and put it aside as, this will be all, as we heard earlier, this will be dealt with once we have the society that we all aspire to.
Yeah. This is why I mentioned the work of the Spartacus League and their publication Women in Revolution. And what they were trying to do to a certain extent was emulate the type of organisation and work that the Bolsheviks did. Lenin recognised the absolute necessity of integrating women into the movement, Lenin and others. And I think that a genuinely revolutionary left needs to do that. And I agree that the legacy of 68, or around kind of, and then going into the 70s, there were various problems. Elements of the left were still very sexist and not taking women's issues seriously, which are everyone's issues. And at the same time, women's liberation itself had its own momentum and was doing good things in and of itself. What the Spartacus League were trying to do was, and other elements of the left to a certain extent, were trying to bring together these two strands. But then, because of the nature of feminism not being rooted essentially in the working class, it did dissipate, and its fate is always to kind of ebb and flow, I think, and because it doesn't really provide the answers for real change. So yes, we need to listen to feminists, but actually I think it's actually revolutionary socialists who've really done the best work, male and female revolutionary socialists, in bringing the best of feminism, if you like, but I wouldn't use that word, of making sure that women are integrated, and that transitional organisations that I was talking about earlier, that we have ways of organising women. They're not just say, you join the Revolutionary Party and that's it, but that the Revolutionary Party is a guiding tool to help all oppressed layers become integrated and become part of the movement, and also to develop our programme. I mean, I'm a Trotskyist. The transitional programme, which is a big part of our programme even today, is severely lacking on questions that affect women and other oppressed groups. We could talk about why that is, but the point is, what do we do with that today? I think the left has come a long way. Like we know we have to deal with these things, and I think that our tradition has done that. The Bolsheviks did do it because they were in a pre-revolutionary and revolutionary situation. They had to do it. So we know it's possible. But even just the term feminism itself, like this came up earlier. Like, it's not just about taking elements of it. That it's, in some ways, it's diametrically opposed to a Marxist framework as well, a Marxist outlook, because it's just another, essentially anti-working class ideology that wants to try and solve it within a capitalist framework and contain more revolutionary struggles. Even the Marxist feminists don't really provide the answer in that sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say something?
I'm trying to think. So how to bring it back to the questions that I have on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But also because I'm actually, I mean, I am thinking because you seem to come from a very different context, and I'm not sure whether it's the UK context or the specifically Marxist context. So I'm not part of any Marxist groups, and I don't have that kind of this rather, I would say it's a rather crude view of feminism, and I think there are, and I mean you acknowledge that there are Marxist feminists, but you say like they have this inherent problem of.
Well, for example, wages for housewives.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, like, well, because it's actually one of the few real attempts at a theoretical contribution by this trend that calls itself Marxist feminists, and it's completely unscientific, in my view, completely non-Marxist, and these same people, as I mentioned earlier, also essentially at the same time, because it's a logical conclusion of their politics, are saying, well, it kind of making men and the working class and the left all sort of synonymous, and that women and feminists are this separate thing that are fighting the great struggle. Even telling women that kind of working in itself is somehow reactionary, being in a trade union with evil men. But my starting point is solidarity. It's our necessary starting point, and it's also completely idealistic and anti-working class. Everyone has to work. Working people have to work. And so what do we do within this capitalist framework to improve our lives and to break out of it? I mean, I don't want to be crude about feminism, because I know that there are different trends and things ebb and flow as well. I mean, what didn't really come up today was identity politics. It seemed like everyone in this room was actually to the left of that to a large extent. We were missing one of our panelists, so perhaps we would have, that would have pushed the debate in that direction. But for me, it's all part of, it's why I started my speech by saying, it might take a different form, it might have a different name, but we're dealing with the same things, whether it's Emmeline Pankhurst versus Sylvia Pankhurst, or it's the identity politics or other trends of feminism versus Marxism today. I don't know whether that's...
I think we're probably on the same page when it comes to what we want. I'm not sure about how I want it, but certainly what we want, and the solidarity as the starting point. I think what surprised me was how contagious contentious the labelling seems to be, which I think isn't the same discussion in, I don't know, Belgium, Germany, the debates that I'm also familiar with. But from a UK perspective, I can see that it is very, very kind of focused on these identity discussions, and they have kind of exploded, perhaps. So maybe that is why
it's a big part of the British left, yeah. And actually, because a lot of it actually came out of the SWP imploding, and kind of people throwing out the baby with the bathwater, anti-Leninist politics, and kind of embracing identity politics coming out of that as well. But I'm not really concerned with labels as such, particularly because it's often not anything new. It is just a different form of the same thing. But I'm interested in the political programme of these movements. That's what I always want to come back to. Is it a political programme that's coherent, that can provide an answer for us to change society, or not? Is it something that can give us elements of that, or is it ultimately a reactionary programme, or does it put fetters on us? Does it contain us? So, I mean, you also mentioned, women and not just feminism. Like, one of the things I do think about is the real lack of women in the movements. Someone mentioned it earlier. It is a real problem. It's very isolating. It makes it harder to be a black activist or a female activist, whatever, when you are in a minority, and that's always been the case. But if you believe that we have to fundamentally change society, and you're fighting for that program, then, and that's your necessary starting point, then that's where you have to start. And you know, we have to take the struggle forward. I mean, we mentioned United Front work. I think that's very important too. Now, this can come into the first question of listening, because if we want to really genuinely penetrate all layers of society, and we want to recruit people to what we believe is the program that can actually change the roots of all the problems, we have to work with people as well. We've worked with feminists, we've worked with black nationalists, we've worked with anarchists and the anti-fascist movement, because we think not only is that it's vital to fight these things within the capitalist framework, but this is partly how we bridge the gap to finding our common framework to break out altogether. So, yeah, I'm less interested in labels than what people do and what their program does.
The last question would be, because this whole conference is under the oh God, I'm tired. Started with 50 years of 68.
Oh yeah.
Legacy. I mean, the first question would be, what does 68 mean in the context of, you know, whatever you might discuss under women's question or Marxism, feminism, depending on where you're coming from.
When you ask that question, are you talking in general about the kind of the pre-revolutionary situations of 68, or are you talking about women's liberation within that, or everything?
It would be your definition, really, but I would probably come from the question of women's liberation in the context of 68 and the legacy for today. So, well, you know.
Yeah.
Why would it be important? Would it, to look back? What are the lessons to be learned, perhaps, and what not?
I think that the other speaker touched on the real importance of the progress that we've made with real breakthroughs with control over our own bodies, for example, so abortion and contraception, all these things that in many parts of the world we take for granted, although, you know, places like Ireland, not that far away, is obviously a very different story. To me, it's a question that kind of links with what someone from the audience asked, which is, you know, is there a net gain kind of thing? Like, I know that part of the Platypus project as well, I know you're not with Platypus, but, you know, looking at, but this is what we do too. What are the lessons of history? What can we take forward? Obviously, the position of women is much, much better in many ways, but society is degenerating because capitalism is degenerating, and that's been its trend for a long, long time. So women's position is going to get worse unless we challenge that. And consciousness is always based on our material conditions, ultimately. So 68 did a lot for us as women, as workers, as revolutionaries, and it raised our consciousness in many ways, and it made it be part of the conversation for the left, and to be a real part of our program, and to modernise it to a certain extent. I mean, you know, because my tradition is in the Bolsheviks, you know, it's amazing that when you look at that, how fresh it was, how revolutionary it was then, but even reading it now, it looks fresh because no one's really doing it. No one's really doing it because we don't actually have a mass revolutionary workers' party now, which is, for me, the tool that we really need. And women's liberation is just part of that struggle. It's our inability to really recruit at the moment is reflected in the women's question as well. You know, there's but the necessity for change is still there, and I think I'm optimistic as well that partly through struggle itself we can draw women and others in to be able to change things. So 68 in itself provided many lessons for us as revolutionaries and as workers, not just for the women's question, but it also points to ultimately what happens when you don't have a revolutionary party or revolutionary leadership, when you have so much potential, these pre-revolutionary situations that essentially all dissipate to nothing when it really comes down to it. And that's the women's liberation movement too. You know, going downhill throughout the 70s, becoming more petty bourgeois as well, because there was no other outlet. It's like, well, you know, maybe that didn't work, so now we're gonna try this thing, and channeling our energies over here. And to a certain extent, that's what people are doing today with identity politics. I think to a certain extent, identity politics is a legacy of that, but then, you know, it's not just a legacy of that. Anyway, don't know if that was a bit of a rambling answer to your question.
I think it's good, and we covered quite a few